Hey guys, we're continuing our Calcasieu Parish Sheriff candidate interviews. We have Les Blanchard with us today. We are at the Village Coffee House here in Sulphur, Louisiana. Maybe a little bit of background noise, but I think you guys will be able to pick us up pretty good today. We've got the same questions that we sent out to everybody else. Just a really quick preface. It's the same 5 questions that we sent to all of the candidates. There are 6 candidates running for sheriff. We were only able to contact 5 of them, so 5 are participating. The Bradley Moss candidate is not going to be participating because we can't seem to locate him. So, Les, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you taking your time out of your day to join us and talk to us and answer these questions regarding the Second Amendment today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We're going to jump right into it like we have with everybody else, and I will tell you that I will ask follow-up questions. This is not a typical politician type interview. If we don't feel like you're satisfying the question, we're going to ask for follow-up answers.
Sure.
Just out of fairness to everybody, because we have a lot of our viewers out there that are interested in these answers, and we want to make sure that we're not getting the same old politic-speak that you typically get when you talk to a candidate where they're not really answering the question. We're looking for the actual answers here.
Correct.
All right, let's get started. Number 1, do you support the law-abiding people of Calcasieu Parish constitutional right to purchase and own all currently available firearms, including AR-15s, along with standard capacity magazines that can hold 30 rounds or more?
Absolutely, I do.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about that, because you know there's a lot of debate. The reason why this question is so important, this is not a super crazy, way out there hypothetical. This is something that the President of the United States comes out almost weekly. In fact, Sunday he made social media posts, again, pushing we need to ban AR-15s, and they call them high-capacity magazines, which is an incorrect term because 30 rounds is the standard capacity. So this is not something that is pie in the sky that the far left wants to implement. This is something they push almost weekly. So that's why this is being asked. I want to know your opinion on that. Since you agree that they should have them as sheriff, how would you approach that if the federal government is successful in passing a, quote, ban on them?
Well, it's smoke and mirrors. It's like anything else with political agendas. That's the problem today. And when you're a true supporter of the Second Amendment, you're not going to infringe on our citizens' rights. And I can tell you in Calcasieu, yeah, we're a strong hunting and fishing, but that's not what this is about. This is about our right to keep and bear arms. And I can tell you, there's too much governmental interference now. And if we get back to the basics of why that was implemented in the first place, we need to defend that because it is our right. And far too often, it becomes a political agenda in trying to ban those things. I am not in favor of gun control. I'm in favor of gun possession.
Fair enough. Let's move on to number 2. Do you believe law-abiding citizens should be able to give, loan, or sell a gun to a friend or a family member without filling out a federal background check? And obviously what we're talking about there is, again, something that the federal government keeps pushing, which they call them universal background checks. There's been this kind of guise out there, or I call it a lie, that there's somehow not background checks. A lot of the general public, believe it or not, doesn't realize that we have full-blown background checks through the NICS system, through the FBI and all that. And mainly that's people who have not purchased firearms or who have not purchased them through an FFL dealer. We have background checks, obviously. What this is talking about is private sales. That's what they want to outlaw. If you and I want to sell a gun to each other or trade a gun to each other, they're wanting to outlaw that. They're wanting you and I to have to go to an FFL or a retail outlet and go ask for permission to sell those, because they can decline that, by the way. If you and I went to an FFL, they could say, no, we're not going to allow that transfer. Correct. So if that's the only means to transfer guns to one another privately, then they could shut all of that down. They could set a different type of standard for private sales. So that's what we're talking about. So again, back to the question. Do you agree that there should be private sales out there between citizens like us? And again, let's get this part out of the way. We're talking about legal law-abiding citizens. I'm not talking about me popping my trunk and selling to felons downtown or something like that. I'm talking about you and I who know that I know you're not a felon, or I assume you're not a felon, and vice versa. That's who I'm talking about.
Right. And to expand on that a little bit, we're talking about people that are abiding by the rules in the first place. Look, if people want weapons, firearms, they're going to get them, whether it's legal or not. And we're talking about, yet again, more regulations on the law-abiding citizens. Enough's enough. You know, if I have a son or a grandson that I want to give a weapon to, why are we putting something in place where we can just gain more funds, or it's a tracking issue so we can keep track of it? Look, we have great investigators across this country. Let them do their job whenever it's needed, but why are we putting everything on the front end? We can follow up on the back end sometimes, and I think there's way too many knee-jerk reactions out there when something happens. Yeah, we do unfortunately have mass shootings and things like that, but it's not the tool itself that is utilized. It's the person that utilizes that tool that we need to focus on. And it's political agendas in trying to control and infringe upon our rights. And I do not support that.
Okay. Number 3, and this is pretty detailed, so bear with me here. In states that have them, red flag confiscation laws, which are sometimes called extreme risk protection orders, allow any individual to petition a court to issue a protective order requiring the accused to immediately relinquish all firearms and ammunition, and giving law enforcement the authority to confiscate all firearms and ammunition from people who are accused of being a danger to themselves or others. All this can take place without the accused's knowledge and without any constitutionally required due process. If Louisiana were to implement a red flag confiscation law, would you as sheriff enforce it?
Look, my job as sheriff is to enforce all laws, but I can tell you, I will take a firm ground in standing against that, and I'll tell you why. Officers have discretion, and far too often we're removing that from them. And in an emergent circumstance, should we be afforded the right to take someone's firearms or ammunition away from them? Absolutely, to prevent that immediate threat, whether it be to themselves or others. But far too often we vilify good people on an incomplete set of details. And that's exactly what scares me about that, is if you give people the right to give a false claim, it could be an ex that's mad at you. And guess what? Your love is firearms, whether it's for a hobby, whether you hunt, whether you really want that protection because you may live in a rougher part of town or you've been victimized before. And whenever we give too much credence to possibly inaccurate details, we're giving way too much power in the wrong direction. Again, let's resort back to the original Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms. I firmly believe in that. And if we allow that to happen, we're setting ourselves up for a lot more problems. You know, there's a lot of things that come into play with that. Mental health, domestic issues. But look, that's also why there's so many firearm laws on the books, is because after the fact, we try and, if something goes wrong, we try and rectify it by putting a law in place. So yes, we have to uphold and enforce those laws, but guess what? It's my job as the top law enforcement official to stand up and defend the rights of our citizens. And that's exactly what I'll do.
As a follow-up to this, you mentioned circumstances that would either allow you, and I don't want to misquote you here, but circumstances that would provide for a reason to confiscate those. I want to be real clear about this. A true red flag law eliminates due process. So if somebody makes that call or that petition to a court system and saying Paul is a threat, the federal government, the local law enforcement, with permission to execute that red flag order, can kick my door in at 2 a.m. in the morning with no due process, not giving me a chance to explain myself or anything like that. I'm assumed to be guilty, and after you've kicked my door in and taken my guns from me, then I have the opportunity to exercise to get my due process. I want to be real clear on this. What would those circumstances be that you would see we could avoid due process and go straight to a person and take their guns from them, if that's what you were saying. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, there are no circumstances that circumvent that process.
Well, excuse me, not to cut you off, but you had mentioned, I don't know, maybe an X or something
I'll
like
explain what I was talking
Okay,
about.
okay.
So what I mean by, so we're removing officers' discretion. And what I mean by that is an emergency protective custody type issue. So we entrust in these officers to carry a sidearm. Mm-hmm. We train them for that. In a split second, they can take someone's life. That's an extreme responsibility. So we need to entrust in them the same responsibility of seizing someone's weapons. But it's not out of malice or the wrong intent. It is seriously to protect that person or those around them. So an officer can do that. But you can't do it kicking in doors without a warrant or due process of law. But what I meant on the other side of things is we have to be careful with the red flag laws, because it's all about interpretation. My interpretation of that is any person at any point can go petition the court and say, hey, they are. And my point is, that is where we're coming to, is you're vilifying a person on an incomplete set of details. That person was not afforded the opportunity to stand up for themselves or have a voice. We're reacting to limited information, and that is always dangerous, regardless of what we're talking about.
Well, and just so I understand my answer, or your answer, the Sheriff's Department is essentially a tool of the court system, right? So if there's a warrant that's issued, you guys, I mean, I know there's other people who would carry that out, but you guys would carry that out.
Sure.
Especially in the parish, that's the biggest law enforcement authority in the parish. If you mentioned a warrant, if a judge, because remember, the federal government, I want to make this really clear, because this is something that's literally happening right now. If you'll remember last year, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act that the federal government passed, in there was the federal government realizes that red flag gun laws are unconstitutional, so they know they can't pass them at the federal level.
Correct.
What they did do is pass the authorization of money to the local communities to implement their own, so it relieves them of violating the Second Amendment, but it puts the onus on the communities. Correct. If Louisiana were to accept some of that money, which they could right now, and say, we're going to have red flag gun laws in Calcasieu Parish, you wouldn't be making that decision, right? Somebody else would be making that decision to accept that money and say, now we have red flag gun laws. If a judge in Calcasieu Parish calls you up and says, Les, we have a warrant for this guy's arrest based on a potential threat that he made, and it's just a random phone call that he got from an ex or somebody like that. Now you're that tool. You're that tool that is being used to confiscate these guns. What do you do?
It's like you said, the federal government knows that it's unconstitutional. I'm not going to do anything unconstitutional. A judge sits and may give you an order, but if it's unconstitutional, that's the bottom line. We're not going to enforce things that are unconstitutional.
And I'm not trying to beat you up on this.
I'm with you.
Because I'm
completely.
asking the other candidates the same thing.
Well, and that's essentially, that's just a small fraction of why this election is so important. Because whenever you look at law enforcement leaders today, you cannot become a pawn in the game. And that's one of the biggest problems I see. This is not about being a governmental entity. This is about doing what's right for your people and the people that you serve. And a true public service is doing what's right for the good of all. And that's what I believe in. And a violation of due process, regardless of semantics or how you want to word it or what political agenda you're after, is wrong. And I'm not going to stand for it. I will defend our rights to the fullest.
Okay. Number 4, if the non-legislative, non-lawmaking ATF were to attempt to require the Sheriff's Office to enforce a ruling that Congress did not pass as a law per the Constitution, would your Sheriff's Office attempt to enforce it? And again, I want to be real clear on this one. The ATF is not a lawmaking body. Congress is. The ATF makes rules. Congress is supposed to pass laws and then you guys are supposed to enforce them. They're circumventing that right now with Congress not fulfilling their duties to pass these laws, and they're allowing the ATF to make rulings that are being implemented like a law, even though they're not a law. And people are going to jail based on breaking rules, not laws. And it's the way the ATF is interpreting that. I want to know if the ATF, and we're going to use an example that I've used with some of the other candidates, the stabilizing brace ruling is a big one right now, a very large one. This is going to affect tens of millions of people, probably 30 or 40 million people. If they are successful in winning all the court battles, because there's tons of lawsuits against the ATF right now for saying this is unconstitutional. If they're successful though, and all these cases get kicked out, and this becomes a quasi-law, and I say that because it's still not a law because Congress didn't pass it. If the ATF is successful, that means that they're going to be calling your office and saying that anybody that is found with an AR-15 or an AR pistol, whatever, with a stabilizing brace on it, that's an illegal firearm considered an SBR. If they don't have a tax stamp, they can go to jail for 10 years or I don't know if it's 10 years, $10,000 or whatever it is, whatever the amount is. So they're going to be expecting you guys to enforce their rule that Congress never ruled on. So I want to make that real clear that you're going to be expected to enforce a rule, not a law. I understand you want to enforce the law, but in this case, this is not. How would you handle that if somebody says, all right, Les, now this is how you have to do it. Your deputies now are going to be expected to contact the ATF anytime you find somebody with stabilizing brace, and now they could go to jail for 10 years.
So again, it boils down to exactly what you're saying, rule versus law. We enforce the law. That's what we're obligated to do. Rules are like policies and procedures. It's not my obligation to enforce the ATF's policy and procedure. If that is their rule, they have employees as well. They can send their employees to do whatever they need to do. But me as sheriff and having the best interest of our deputies at heart, I'm not sending those great men and women into those situations to set them up for failure, because you're asking a lot for someone to take someone's firearms away. And again, it expands beyond just enforcing this rule, because you do have due process. So are we asking for them to surrender them voluntarily, or are we kicking a door? Because I can tell you, how many people are going to voluntarily surrender them? I submit to you, probably none.
Very few have done it so far.
And so then you step to the next level for us. Again, we're not pawns in the game. We're going to do our job, but if it is not law for us to enforce, we're not going to do it.
Well, I just want you to understand this. Know that the ATF, while they are a quasi-law enforcement agency, they do rely on the PDs and the sheriff's offices to help them implement these things. In other words, let's say they want to come to my house. Let's say they want to arrest me or something like that. For that reason, stabilizing braces. They don't have a SWAT team in Lake Charles, Louisiana. They will be calling you.
Correct.
And saying, Les, we need your guys to partner with my ATF. That's a difficult position for you to be in if you're sheriff, because you have a relationship with the ATF. I mean, I don't have a whole lot of love for the ATF, but in your case, you guys will be working shoulder to shoulder sometimes with the ATF and other crime scenes and things like that. I realize that you have to have that relationship with them because you just do it. In fact, I think the ATF actually has an office at the Calcasieu Parish Sheriff's Office, at least they used to. So I know that there's a really close relationship already, and that's why this question is important to me, because I know you're already going to have a relationship with those guys. It's going to be hard to tell them, I'm not enforcing your law. You may have coffee with this guy every other morning. You know this guy, you know his family and all that. Now you have to tell this guy, as sheriff, I'm not doing that. Are you willing to be able to do that?
Absolutely, and you made an interesting comment. You said, are you going to be willing to not enforce that law? Again, let's be very clear, law versus rule.
Yeah.
So we have a very, very good relationship with all of our federal partners. The ATF is one of them, and I think they serve a very good purpose.
We disagree on that, but I hear you.
Well, but they do on other things, and I'll expand on that in a second. They do serve a good purpose, but I think like anything else, they can be utilized for other purposes too. And that's an unfortunate set of circumstances. And I think that's where we're at in a lot of areas in the country today. So, but being focused on Calcasieu and what I would actually truly be responsible for, we do need to nurture those relationships and foster them and do the right things. But it's about the law and enforcing the law. And we have deputies that work for us that are assigned to the ATF task force. But I can tell you, it's one of those things. It's no different than narcotics. You know, we have the CAT team, we are partners with federal agencies for narcotics enforcement. And if we reach the point to where I don't agree with what they're doing or I can't abide by what their rules are, then that's when we need to take a step back and reevaluate it, because I'm all about being a great partner and I want their assistance, but I'm not going to go outside of the lines to violate our citizens' rights. I'm just not going to do it.
Well, with all due respect on who they are, they obviously are very convincing, the ATF is, because they've convinced Congress to basically cede their power to them. So no offense to you, you're just a parish or a sheriff in Calcasieu Parish, right?
Exactly.
So they're going to think they can definitely convince you if they've convinced people in Washington, D.C. to let them have all that power. That's my biggest thing, is they have assumed power that they don't constitutionally have. And I feel like that if you look in other parts of the country, they're certainly abusing that right now. And I think people in Calcasieu Parish are very concerned with that, because we see what's happening everywhere else. And typically what happens on the east and the west coast trickles down to the center part of the country at some point.
Sure.
So that's a big concern of everybody. That's why this is such an important question.
It is.
So I appreciate you being very detailed on that.
Yes.
Last question, number 5. Our neighbors directly to our north, Beauregard Parish, are an official Second Amendment sanctuary parish, which means that any new law that is passed which is against or violates the people's Second Amendment rights in any way will not be enforced with any local funds or utilizing any local law enforcement. As Sheriff of Calcasieu Parish, would you consider making Calcasieu Parish a Second Amendment sanctuary parish? Now, granted, this is not a decision for the sheriff. The police jury is the one who establishes that and
Correct.
makes that a thing. But I would imagine that they would lean on you as the Sheriff of Calcasieu Parish to be an integral part of making that decision whether or not they're going to do that. How would you handle that, being a part of that process?
And actually, I kind of think of things a little bit differently sometimes, and that's where I lean on them, because I believe in that wholeheartedly. Why we're not there already, I don't understand it. So absolutely I believe in that, and I think Beauregard is ahead of the curve on that, and we should have already established that, and I'm glad you asked that, because that is actually part of my plan. I intend on doing just that.
Well, and I appreciate you saying that, because anybody who wins this election, the first thing I will be doing is pressing them to work with me to talk to the police jury, whether we establish a meeting with them or whatever, to explain the benefits of that and why the people, I mean, I'm perfectly fine making it a vote in the Calcasieu Parish if they want to. If they truly want to know what the pulse of the people are in the parish,
Yes.
I'm so confident that the people in Calcasieu Parish would want to be a Second Amendment sanctuary parish that I'm willing to put it up to a vote. Any public official who's not willing to put it up to a public vote tells me where they stand and what they think the public really thinks.
Absolutely.
So I will hold you to that.
No, I agree completely, because that's the greatest thing about a democracy, right? It's the people's decision. And I agree with you completely, but my stance as being sheriff would absolutely be to protect our people. And I think that's what we need to do.
Okay, fair enough. Les, tell the people where they can go to get more information about your campaign.
So for my campaign, you can go to blanchardforsheriff.com, or you can contact me. I believe in being accessible to everyone in the parish, and I will give you my cell phone number. It is area code 337-263-4344. And you can contact me anytime. I truly believe in being accessible, because at the end of the day, you are my boss.
Les, I appreciate you taking the time with us, and I wish you all the best in the election.
Thank you.
God save the Queen, man.
I'm sorry, I thought this was America. ¡Pistola, agua!